Hi, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, seasonal greetings. On the spirit of Christmas, I want to share with you guys my very first course, so the first 3 recordings of my very first course on economical cycles. Because it is the end of the year, it is approaching, I decided to look back at my very first courses and I see that information on that course is very relevant, especially because we may be approaching a great recession or a depression. And I decided to give you guys a gift. And that gift is my 2 or 3 first classes on the economical cycles. Those classes are going to be available to you guys for free on YouTube because I'm just also making a new course that's going to be launched next year on Easter. And because I'm making a new course, I decided to share with you guys the old course. The information is going to be pretty much the same. Of course, I'm going to change the delivery. I'm going to improve the delivery, but here is for you guys my very first course on economical cycles. I hope the information is relevant to you, and I hope you guys can enjoy to see how uncomfortable I was on the camera back then and how comfortable I became now. This is it. I hope you enjoyed this gift. I hope you make the best of it, and I hope it helps you guys become the next year, because I believe next year we may have a recession. And if you do not agree with me, please let me know that on the comments below. And if you do agree, let me know. Also, give me some feedback on the course and how can I improve the new one. This is it for now. See you guys in the next video. And once again, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you. What is an economical cycle? What is a recession? What is a depression? What is an investor? Who is the creditor? And what those characters have to do with economical cycles. If you want to understand economical cycles, if you want to be able to understand what they are, how they work, why they're important, and be able to predict which point of the economical cycle we are in, is the beginning of the boom, is the end of the boom, is the beginning of the bust. So if you have questions such as this, please continue watching this video, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And the video today is going to be a first on a series of 2 or 3 videos. I'm not sure yet. So without any further ado, let's go into the video. So first of all, before we go into the video, I need to make a disclaimer. Nothing that we ever produce in any of our platforms is to be considered financial or tax advice. So with that out of the way, welcome to CryptoVagabonds Academy. And again, today we're going to be talking about economical cycles part 1. That's what the video is about today. So we're going to be answering the questions. What are economical cycles? Who is a creditor? Who is an investor? What is maturation? Time date means the definition of a recession. Why is it necessary for us to have a recession? What is a central bank? Nominal assets, false assets, and real assets. So we're going to be talking about those things today, and if you would like to know what these are and how to make sense of all this, continue watching this with us. So what are economical cycles? Economical cycles go in movement of expansion, reach the peak, also known as crisis, then recession, then expansion and recession, or bottom and then expansion again. So what are those? Those are irregular, recurring fluctuations of the economy activity globally and locally. Again, irregular, recurring fluctuations of economy activity globally and locally. It is possible that one country could be in expansion while another country is in recession. The country could be in expansion and your town or your state be in recession. So it happens differently depending where you are and how big on the micro scale you want to go. So here you can see that every one of those gray columns on this graph represents a recession. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And in this graph we don't have it, but if further we're going to have the one for 2020 as well. So as you can see, it goes up and down. It's very normal for the economy to go up and down. Now, let's look at Brazil. In this presentation, I'm talking a lot about Brazil because, as you guys may know, I'm Brazilian and I have graphs and I have observed these events of this graph occurring in Brazil. So, the Brazilian GDP, as you can see, goes up and comes down negative, goes up and comes down negative, and here it went really negative in 2016. So, again, good liquidity is when we are in expansion, when things are going well, when the economy is going up for the beginning of the bull run. That's good liquidity. So let's define good liquidity. So the creditor in our narrative today is the person who saves money. is the person who saves money to lend out at interest with a specific deadline, aka maturation date. So the investor is the person who borrows money and invests the borrowed money and time in enterprise. So the person is going to be investing the money that he took, in this case this person as investor, and his time into an enterprise. Now, maturation time is the amount of time required for investment to give its fruits. In this case, the guy that we chose is going to plant tomatoes, so when the tomatoes give fruits, when it's harvested, that's the maturation time. And I specifically use the tomatoes so you can see the correlation between the name and what represents maturation. Now that you know who is the creditor, who is an investor, and what is maturation, and again, in this graph, I made a point of making a little opaque, not very clear picture, because the investor needs to have a vision, which is opaque, not very clear, but is there in the future, the possibility of harvesting those tomatoes. Now, of course, the investor goes to the creditor with his idea, which is still opaque, and trying to convince the creditor to give the investor or to loan some money to the investor. So the investor make the pitch, the creditor listens, this is the pitch, we're going to have tomatoes, and then when the creditor gives money to the investor, that idea becomes a bit more solid, a bit more concrete, the graph starts to take more color, and of course, on the time for the maturation time, the investor sells the fruits, collects the money, and has his profit and pay the creditor. And whenever this occurs, we have good liquidity. Loans are being provided. The investor or the person who took the loan pays back on the maturation time, good liquidity, everything's perfect, the economy goes on. So this is good liquidity. Now let's see at deterioration of liquidity or bad liquidity. So deterioration of liquidity is a mismatch between maturation and deadline. So the creditor gave the loan, expects to be paid at a certain date, and that payment does not occur. That is deterioration of liquidity. So the needs of the creditor does not match the ability of the investor. So the investor took the money but doesn't have the ability to pay the loan according to the needs of the creditor. So the cash flows from investor, so the cash flow from the investor does not match the expectation of the creditor, and that causes turbulence on the economy because the creditor gave the money, the investor took the money, but he cannot make the payment on due time or the maturation date, and that is what causes deterioration of liquidity. So in our illustration, how it goes, the investor talks to the creditor, gives the idea, again a bit opaque, the investor gets the money from the creditor, the idea becomes a bit more concrete, but when the maturation time comes, there are no tomatoes, and it could be that the investor did everything correct. A storm may occur, or a tsunami, or a drought, something occurs and prevents the investor to have the ability to give the money back to the creditor, and then that creditor will not be loaning money out with the same interest or with the same easy conditions, and then liquidity starts to deteriorate. So now the creditor holds money back and no, there's no money for the investor, and then things do not work as smoothly or as well, or there's no expansion of the economy. So deterioration of liquidity is also known as recession, and is extremely necessary to clean non-investment, because if the creditor continues to give money and taking risks, eventually that creditor is going to be taking too much risk, the investors are not going to have the ability to return the money, and then the investor has to withdraw and be a bit more careful about investments, and the more investment gets clean on a recession. So it's extremely necessary for us to have those more investment. That way the creditor becomes a bit more careful and you start to be more careful about how and where to invest. Now, once it becomes a bit more risky, interest rates go up, as we can see happening now with the Federal Reserve, increasing interest rates. So that gives the signal to the investors that they have to take fewer risks because the conditions of the credit are going to change. So here you can see again the economical cycles, all the bottom lines being circled in red. So again, irregular, recurring fluctuations of economic activity globally and locally. Now, what do central banks have to do with this? Now, central banks, for this narrative, is an entity with a monopoly on an infinite amount of liquidity. And why is this important? So here is the man who has monopoly on an infinite amount of global liquidity. The liquidity that he has a monopoly on is not just the monopoly of the liquidity in the US, but it is the global reserve. All assets globally are priced in US dollars. So Jerome Powell is the most powerful man on earth because he has monopoly on an infinite amount of liquidity. And this is him at work. So when Jerome Powell becomes our creditor, we have a problem because the creditor now doesn't have to be careful with what risk the creditor takes because, again, this creditor has an infinite amount of liquidity. So that is also known as false liquidity. So imagine if the investor goes to the creditor and the creditor is just throwing money at him. The investor also is going to become careless and doesn't have to worry about maturation anymore. So we have a false creditor, we have the investor that is now not taking risks and doesn't care about maturation. And that false liquidity creates a problem for the creditor because the real creditor, not the central bank, but the real creditor in this case, does not have an infinite amount of liquidity. So when this creditor starts to give loans out, is unable to collect money back, but then there is this last resort, central bank, that starts to give liquidity and is infinite, it blurs, it damages the vision on the economy. So now the creditor doesn't know what to do because that creation of false liquidity promotes, intensifies the temporal mismatch between, again, the expectation of the creditor and the maturation and the ability of the investor. So it makes it impossible for our creditor to read the economy accurately. And again, those are also known as nominal assets because the false liquidity is literally today, this is on a computer. Whenever there's a crisis, they just go there, type and enter. In the crisis of 2008, that's exactly what Ben Bernanke did. He just went on a computer, typed digits to the commercial banks and add false liquidity. So nominal assets is what we call for this narrative false assets. And why are they false? Because there's no effort in order to create the asset. Nominal assets are not really real assets because, again, it doesn't have any inherent value. It didn't take any effort. The effort of typing extra zeros and pressing enter doesn't justify the extra money. So false assets are created effortlessly. Nominal assets are false assets. Now, they also could be labeled liability because if the assets are created without any effort, those are liability. Now, real assets, on the other hand, are known as physical assets, such as gold. When you look at a bar of gold, you can tell that this is not a blade of grass. It took some human effort to mine the gold, to get the gold all together, and to mold the bar. So whenever you look at a bar of gold, you can tell there is some effort there. So that's why we call real assets. Assets that are created with an effort. And that effort is inherent. It's not intrinsic, but it's inherent to the asset. So that asset has inherent worth. Why I don't use the word intrinsic? Because there's no way that value can be intrinsic. Intrinsic means that which is not separable from the particular object. So for instance, if you take a ruby and you shine on the white light, it's always going to be red. You cannot separate the red. As long as there is a white light on a ruby, it's going to reflect red. That is intrinsic. So the color red under the white light is intrinsic to the ruby. Value can never ever be intrinsic. Value is always circumstantial and depends on the eyes of the beholder. So physical assets have inherent worth, inherent value. Now, for instance, BTC also has inherent value, right? So it may not be physical, but it does acquire effort, electricity, energy in order to produce one BTC. So BTC has inherent value or inherent worth. And on average, every 4 years, that inherent value or inherent worth doubles. Why? Because the same amount of effort you start to produce half of BTC on average every 4 years. Is also known as halving. Now, again, the liability issuer, the investor, and the creditor. So the more money in circulation, the less worth the money that you hold has. Therefore, it's a liability, not an asset. So, and this false liquidity warps the economy. It prevents the creditor and every other one, every investor, every creditor, to take a good measure of pulse of the economy, because now we have this false liquidity. It affects everyone and everything. It distorts the economy. So let's recap. We saw what economical cycles are, what is good liquidity, what is the duration of liquidity, the importance of a recession, the role that the central bank plays creating liability, called nominal assets. We saw the difference between nominal assets and real assets. We also saw that there is such thing as infinite liquidity, and therefore that infinite liquidity becomes a liability, not an asset. Hope this video was informative to you. See you on the next video. That was it. That was one of my very first classes on economical cycles. Now, I hope you benefit from this. Please feel free to give me feedback on the comments below. And once again, I'm going to be continue sharing other classes. Going to be 3 classes in total being shared. And I hope you guys enjoy. See you guys in the next video. Kaboom. Goodbye.